So welcome, everyone. It's not often one has the opportunity to introduce somebody who needs no introduction. But it's great that Sid is here. Like many of you probably, when he gave his sermon on Kol Nidrei, Ela Toldot, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, Sid. These are the generations. And he spoke to us about the value of family legacies and the importance of passing things on to the next generation. And one of the practical, concrete suggestions he gave was to make an ethical will. And maybe like many of you, I was intrigued by that. And also, it seemed daunting and I wasn't sure where to begin. And when I spoke to Sid about the possibility of talking with us further about this, he obviously agreed to do it. And he's here tonight to tell us a little bit more about the background of this Jewish custom and help us think through some guidelines of how we might do this for ourselves. So thank you, Sid.
Great. Thank you, Marla, for the introduction, and welcome, everyone. I understand that we only have 4 hours to do this, right? So we've got to kind of get right to it. I'm not sure how long we do have, but there's several things that I want to do in the context of talking about Jewish ethical wills. I first want to provide the background about where it's come from. We'll first read a Mishnah, a classical rabbinic text, which I think plants the seed for this idea of ethical wills. Then I want to look at 2 examples. One is going to be a classical example from Maimonides, and then we'll look at one very different, ethical will from a woman, a contemporary woman. And what I want to do is for each one of those, I'll invite someone to read it. I'll share my screen. Hopefully, people will be able to read it. And I just want to get some reaction to each of those examples. Clearly, there'll be very big differences. And then I'm going to offer a formula about how, if you yourself want to do an ethical will, how you might go about doing it. And at the end, I'll provide some resources where you could learn more about this whole custom, okay? So that's the game plan. And with that, I ask for everyone's prayers that my screen sharing will work. All right. People see that right now?
Yes, we see it, Sid.
Okay. So if it's too small on your screen, under view, you can actually make it larger. But I first want to look at the text, okay? So somebody want to volunteer just to read the text aloud, and then we'll kind of explore what it means. I don't see all the hands, so just someone can unmute and start reading. Myrna, I see you. Myrna, do you want to read it?
Hi, it's Karen. I can jump in. Can I be heard?
Who's speaking now?
Karen Paley.
Karen, go ahead. Go for it.
Jewish ethical wills. Text study. We learned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Eliezer says, repent one day before your death. Rabbi Eliezer's students asked him, but does a person know the day on which he will be died? He said to them, all the more, so this is a good piece of advice. And one should repent today lest he die tomorrow. And by following this advice, one will spend his entire life in a state of repentance. From the Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat 153a.
Okay.
Example.
So,
okay.
Okay. No. Just let's stop right there. Okay. So I'm going to keep it on the screen. The only downside is that by doing that, I don't see all of you. And so if you have a comment, Mauro, this is where you can help out maybe. And that is if people can raise their hands either electronically or by hand. Mauro, you can call on people. I want to ask the question, what this text means to you and why am I using it to introduce a session on Jewish ethical wills?
Let me also say for people who don't know, there, at the bottom of most people's screens, there's something called reactions. And if you click on that, you can raise your hand. If you, let's see if anybody, let's see, somebody has their hand raised, trying to find it. Ralph does.
Go,
Yeah,
Ralph.
well, I guess it's both the thing about trying to do good acts because you don't know what day you're going to die, but it also shows you that a lot of us make the mistake of not doing a will because we don't expect something sudden to happen to us, and all of a sudden, something does happen, and you're incapacitated or you're dead, and your descendants are trying to sort through your resources. So the idea is kind of prepping us that any day we could die, and we should think ahead to that now and not try to put it off.
Exactly. Right on the nail on the head. So it frames it as kind of as a riddle, right? And a lot of people don't understand that in the Mishnah and the Talmud, there's a lot of very subtle humor, and we think that it's because it's a serious Jewish classical text. It's all serious, but the rabbis have a very interesting approach. In this case, it's a riddle, right? Repent one day before you die, and say, well, how would one know? And Rabbi Eliezer says, of course, that's the point, because you don't know when you're going to die. Don't put off what might make you feel uncomfortable right now, which, by the way, is why people do avoid writing wills, buying cemetery plots, all because it's too morbid. I'm sure many of you have had the experience, which I will say we've had, when we've raised issues like this with our kids. They say, we don't want to talk about it. Like, our kids will say that, right? Even though we're doing it for their benefit, it just raises a lot of issues that makes people feel acutely uncomfortable, especially if they're your family. And of course, to be more responsible is to do it earlier rather than later, because there are things you can't do. Once you die, you can't do these things. So simply this is the text that a lot of rabbis point to say we should not delay the work to do that which we want to leave behind and how we ensure our legacy. Now, when you hear the word legacy, there are two meanings to it. And the word will also has these two meanings. And I want to use this as a takeoff point. A lot of us, when we think about wills in our own society, we think about how will our financial resources be allocated or distributed. How much to charity, how much to family, how do we divide it among our families, is it all equal, whatever else. It raises a host of issues. And that's important, and I'm not going to address any of that here, because the kind of the kunst of ethical wills is to say, when you think about legacy, don't just think about financial resources, because there's something that is actually more important that you leave behind. Far more important than the X number of dollars that you leave behind is what you leave behind that your children, grandchildren, and descendants of yours who never knew you personally will essentially benefit from. And that becomes what is an ethical will. So that's kind of the way I want to frame what I want to present here. Ethical wills is not about your financial resources. It's about what your life represented and what you hope to pass on to your children and future generations. So with that, I want to look at these two examples. And I wonder, is someone willing to read the Maimonides letter? Good. Shauna, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. Maimonides' letter to his son, 12th century. Hear, my son, the instruction of your father, and don't forsake the teaching of your mother. Quotation from Proverbs 1:8. Get into the habit of always speaking calmly to everyone. This will prevent you from anger, a serious character flaw which causes people to sin. Once you have distanced yourself from anger, the quality of humility will enter your heart. This radiant quality is the finest of all admirable traits, because through humility, you will also come to fear God, which will cause you to always think about where you came from and where you are going. Therefore, I will now explain to you how to always behave humbly. Speak gently at all times with your head bowed, your eyes looking down to the ground and your heart focusing on God. Don't look at the face of the person to whom you are speaking. Consider everyone as greater than yourself. If he is wise or rich, you should give him respect. If he is poor and you are richer or wiser than he, consider yourself to be more guilty than he, and that he is more worthy than you, since when he sins, it is through error, while yours is deliberate, and you should know better. In all your actions, words, and thoughts, always regard yourself as standing before God's presence. Act with restraint in front of everyone. Torah should always be learned diligently, so you will always be able to fulfill its commands. When you arise from your learning, reflect carefully on what you have studied in order to see what in it that you can put into practice. Examine your actions every morning and evening, and in this way, every one of your days will be spent in tshuva. Concentrate on your prayers by removing all worldly concerns from your heart. Read this letter at least once a week and neglect none of it. Fulfill it, and in doing so, walk with it forever in the ways of God. May he be blessed so that you will succeed in all your ways. Thus you will succeed and merit the world to come, which lies hidden away for the righteous. Every day that you shall read this letter, heaven shall answer your heart's desire. Amen. Selah.
Okay, thanks, Shana. Okay, there's a lot going on in this letter, okay, a lot going on. And I'll let you just get people to kind of react to like what hits you. You know, what's confusing, what impresses you, what might turn you off. What are you taking away from this? And again, if you could use the electronic hands, then Marla can call on you.
Carol?
Well, I was confused by, we all want to be humble in some ways, but to not look at the face of the person to whom you are speaking, and to, I'm trying to find out where he says it, to not have a great sense of, I can't find where he said it, to not have a great sense of confidence. I'm not sure if that's exactly what he said, but that, you know, our confidence gives other people confidence. And
two different points. Let me just react to each one. The thing about lowering your eyes is actually a Middle Eastern custom. In fact, I recall reading one of the postmortems on America's failed intervention in Afghanistan. I read an article where they said that American soldiers were not even taught the basics, that when you speak to women, you can't look at them directly. And the fact that American soldiers did that without meaning any offense almost made their presence even more obnoxious, and that may be too soft a word, to Afghani citizens, right? So this is a custom from the Middle East about being humble. You don't look someone directly in the eye. It's known in many, many cultures. It's not very American, of course, but that's where it's coming from. The other piece you picked up is right in the middle of the paragraph, okay? And it does, in a society like America, where everything is about self-esteem, and we think that's the beginning of all good character traits or healthy personalities, he actually doing a little trick here, okay? And what he's saying is, assume that whoever you're interacting with is more worthy than you are, okay? Because it actually is what brings about a value in, it's called in Hebrew, dan lakaf zechut. It's something that is very, very lacking in American society today. We act the opposite way. Dan lakaf zechut means give the other person, whether they're your friend or your opponent or your adversary, the benefit of the doubt. Assume that they're right and you are wrong. And in that posture, we create a more harmonious and civil society.
mm-hmm.
And if you think that you are better than your friend, your counterpart, your adversary, you always assume from the beginning that you're right and they're wrong, which essentially sows a seed for discord. So it strikes, again, an American ear as a little counterintuitive. Why would you say this to someone? But that's where that's coming from.
Okay.
So it's great that you picked that up. I just wanted to comment on it. Other comments?
Myrna?
Yeah, I was struck by the fact that he asks his son to discuss this, to review this daily or at least once a week. And that is really, I think, what is very necessary if you're looking to either change behavior, create awareness of your behavior, and make the change and keep the change going. So he not only commands certain or suggests certain behaviors, he also gives him a recipe, I think, for making those behaviors more a part of his life. And I think that's a very important part of.
Okay, thanks, Myrna. Okay, interesting. I'm wondering whether anyone, just on the other side of it, I think I agree with you totally, but I'm also wondering if anyone reads this as a little bit of helicopter parenting or parenting from the grave. You know, like, maybe I'm gone for 10 years, but these words should stay, in your ears. Don't forget what I've told you to do, right? I mean, you could read it that way too.
Shauna, do you want to go?
Sure. I am also struck by when you rise from your learning, reflect carefully on what you've studied in order to put it into practice. Because I think so often we learn things theoretically, or we learn things, but we don't necessarily put them into practice. And so I really like that pairing. It's not enough to study and to be a good student, but you have to be a good actor in this world. I also wanted to, pick up on what I think it was Myrna was saying about the reviewing it. This was a conversation that I had with my brother during the pandemic, and with everyone at home, he was saying that the way a dancer chooses a spot so they can pirouette and they don't get dizzy, for him, Shabbat was the focus point. Like, he was a dancer, and every Shabbat he focused. And I think of this kind of review in that same way.
Nice, very nice.
Cheryl?
There's something about the cadence of this that reminds me of the long part of the Shema. It's almost like a prayer with, just a series of instructions, do this, and when you rise up and when you lie down, and the repetition of it, I felt was the insistence on repetition was kind of reflective of prayer. So
It's a really lovely observation, Cheryl. And the second you said it, I see it also. And I think the word cadence is exactly right. Same cadence, and you kind of wonder whether Maimonides does that intentionally, in a sense. Having this read like a prayer as opposed to a letter from a father to a son. Nice.
And if you do these things, good things will come your way.
Right, exactly. Right. Which, by the way, parallels a theological concept which Reconstructionists have a little trouble with, called in Hebrew schar v'onesh, which is essentially reward and punishment. So classical rabbinic theology believes that there's a correlation between your good behavior and good things happening to you, and your bad behavior and bad things happening to you. It's theologically very problematic, but it's core to rabbinic theology. It's actually the starting point for Harold Kushner's famous book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, because that's what Harold Kushner actually had an experience where his son was born with a very serious genetic deficiency and died at age 11, I think. Whatever, I forget the name of the disease. I can't pronounce it.
Progeria.
Was that it?
It's getting old quickly.
Exactly, right. So Harold Kushner takes that experience and asks the question, can I actually embrace the rabbinic theology? Was my son an evil person to have had this cast upon him, or this hand dealt to him by God? And of course, Kushner comes away with what has become a classic. It was first, by the way, a classic in Reconstructionist theology. A little known trivia fact, you can save this next time you're playing Trivial Pursuits. The first publisher of When Bad Things Happen to Good People was the Reconstructionist Press. And they sold the rights to it foolishly, because had they kept it, they could have funded the entire RC Rabbinical College for like 100 years. But the Reconstructionist movement did not have a publishing wherewithal. They just, Kushner was part of the Mordechai Kaplan family, was one of his devotees, one of his students, wrote this book, and when it was picked up by a mainstream publisher, of course, became an all-time bestseller. But the beginning point for Kushner was that his life experience did not verify what he was taught as a rabbinical student, that that's how God works. And he concludes that can't be how God works. And in that way, essentially challenges a core teaching of rabbinic theology.
Patty?
I actually really like the way this started in terms of saying always speak calmly and a way of dealing with anger. But then it went on to say, by having a sense of humility, you will also come to fear God, which will cause you to always think about where you came from and where you're going. Well, I really have trouble with the fear of God and putting that in the letter, at all. But I've been trying to write an ethical will for years and years and years. And I don't know how to do it, but I certainly wouldn't include a fear of God in it.
So let me say that on the issue of fear of God, you're probably not alone, Patty, in finding that a bit off-putting. My guess is that it's a translation of the term Yirat Hashem or Yirat Adonai. And it's not a good translation, although that's how it's usually rendered. So a better way of translating Yirat Hashem would be awe of God. It means the same thing, but it gets translated as fear. Now, in a traditional universe, nobody would blink at fearing God. Okay, in a modern, progressive, contemporary audience, it's an off-putting word, and I think if you, I'm just curious, you can react. If it said, be in awe of a power greater than yourself, it probably would not be as off-putting as fear God.
True. Yeah.
Right. In other words, essentially the idea is, in the way that I would not translate it, but render it in a Reconstructionist setting would be to say, be aware that you are not the, be all and end all of wisdom, that there's a wisdom greater than you out there in the universe. And whether it's embodied in a being or in the wisdom of the universe or something else, it's simply a way to say, to take your own sense of self-worth one notch down, so you have enough humility to be open to other people's perspectives and other realities that may be beyond yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Phil has something to say.
I'm struck by the what seems like almost hypocrisy, certainly a bit of a contradiction between his words about you meet a rich man, bow down, you meet a poor man, bow down, everyone is greater than you. And yet here he is, assuming that he knows more than his son, whoever his son is. And then the whole notion of, being in fear of God or in awe of God, like, well, who is he, to tell all this when he himself might, follow his own advice and be more reserved and looking down more and in awe of God more. And yet here he is. Maybe there's a parental exception. I don't know, but he's certainly taking advantage of his role to teach his son under these circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's, it's an interesting observation, but I would also observe that, the 21st century is very different than the 12th century. And we're going to look at a 21st century ethical will in a moment. But I would say that today, it is, whether it's good or bad, it's a conversation for another day. We authorize our children far more than was the case several generations back. In the 12th century, for a father to assume that he, or in the case of a mother, she, has far more wisdom than their children and is authorized to impart it in a way that is even didactic, wouldn't make anyone flinch at all. In a contemporary sensibility, we might say a little bit like, hey, maybe my kids know more than I do, and who am I to tell them anything, right? And here again, that's a whole conversation about how we parent in the 21st century and whether that leads to healthier kids or a healthier society or the opposite of that.
I just wanted to pick up something on that tone. I was remembering, I think it was your talk, Sid, where you were talking about how we need to listen to our children and maybe they have some things to teach us. And the other thought that I wanted to add is, even though it has that tone and certainly contextualized in the time, it makes sense. And also it's sort of, that's the concept of God, that God is the one who's watching and will know in the same way a parent would. It sort of seemed parallel to me. But the other thing that struck me is how clear his message is. You know, Patty, when you were talking about difficulty writing it, I was thinking that's for me the hardest part, is figuring out, well, what is the most important thing? Like, what are the things I really want to be clear about? And I think Maimonides has done that here. He's been very clear about what he thinks is most important for his children to know about him.
Yeah, nice. Okay, I want to go to the next one. I see.
We'll have one more comment, yeah.
Bobby, okay, we should move on. I want to, because I know I've got a bunch of material to cover, and maybe you can weave it into your next comment. Is that okay? You yield the floor. Thank you. So let's take a look at a 21st century letter, which I think may be more in keeping with our own sensibilities. Somebody want volunteer to read that? Anybody?
I will, Sid.
Okay, Myrna, go ahead.
Dear family and friends, ethical wills are a traditional Jewish way to pass on values and life lessons. I only learned about ethical wills recently, but when I heard about them, I knew I wanted to make one. Ethical wills began as letters parents wrote and put away for their children in case they died before their children reached adulthood, so that they could continue to provide moral instruction and life wisdom even after death. Thankfully, I have lived to see my children grow into wonderful, loving adults, and they, like the rest of you, know me and my values pretty well, as I have never exactly been quiet about what I think. Still, writing this has given me some new insights, so here I go. In preparing to write this, I made a timeline of important events in my life and thought about questions that were meant to help me articulate and describe a legacy. You can imagine how surprised I was to find my answers were pretty ordinary. Marrying John, becoming Anne's mother and Lily's grandmother. Here I am, someone who believes in social change, highlighting social conventions. That realization led me to these thoughts. These were good choices for me, but I don't view them as normative or necessarily for everyone. I had been part of an amazing community of friends who made other choices, like devoting their lives to art, advocacy, or service. And I love how our different lives weave together. What matters is not to waste the precious life you were given. Even conventional choices take work to maintain. There are some roadmaps available for being a spouse and being a parent, but even these aren't one size fits all either. Really, what I have found is that being a thinking, healthy, caring human being, no matter what you do, requires discipline, creativity, and above all, love. Love for yourself, for your family, and your world. My choices also resonate with Jewish values. Jewish values were part of the legacy I received from family, and I have tried to live them in my own life, mindful of where they come from and where we need to take them. On Anna's bat mitzvah, I chose a tree of life design for the talit, because that is what I wanted us to be that day. A tree of life extending back for centuries and forward into the future. And we were. We always are. I felt similarly the day we marched for women's rights in DC, 3 generations together, men and women, old and young. That attention to making a better world is very Jewish, but it is also part of being an American and not taking freedoms for granted. Please don't take them for granted, and always look at the world both as it is and as it could be. We don't know when our own tree of life will be cut down or compromised. Having survived breast cancer, I know that only too well. My financial, medical, and legal papers are all in order, and yet there are things I may have forgotten to tell you or not emphasized enough. Ethical wills are about that too. You've all enhanced my life, and I hope I have contributed to yours. I hope I have not offended you, and I ask forgiveness if I have. I love you all and want to thank you. Blessings.
Very different in tone, right? Very
Very
different in
different.
tone. Yeah, and very moving. I've read this several times, and I still get choked up when I get towards the end. So comments about this, and maybe if you want to contrast this with Maimonides, be interesting, but let's take comments. Bob, your hand's still up. You want to make a comment now? You've got the privilege of the floor. Got to unmute, Bob.
Thank you. The comment I wanted to make had to do with the general idea of tone. You know, in our modern world, I have found that it can be very difficult when you read an email to understand, you know, the tone of the person who wrote it. And sometimes it can look like someone's angry when they're not, or that they're not angry when they are. I was thinking about this in terms of the will from Maimonides. If I had read that, in my head, I was reading it as a kind of a quiet and permissive instruction to his son. That was me putting, you know, my heart into it, but you don't always know how it's going to be read. And that's one of the things about writing something. If there's a way to put in descriptors or something that, you know, gives it a sense of tone, and also knowing who you're writing to, they'll hear your own voice and the way you're putting it. It's just something to think about with these kinds of documents, that, you know, the people reading it usually will put their own tone interpretation onto it, and any clues you can give them as to how you intend it are helpful.
Thank you.
Ari,
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Chag Sameach. So when I was scribbling before, I was thinking writing an ethical will is probably, I was thinking a little bit of my wisdom and my values, like this woman wrote, and what's important to me. And it's maybe for me much easier than writing like an autobiography about my life and what's important to me. So I was thinking also, I love it, by the way. And I was thinking, when do we share ethical wills? That was one question that came up. And also, just following Bob, I was wondering if ethical wills could also be probably like video clips, so that you do hear the tone of the person and how I express to my children and my descendants and family. And although technology may change so much over the years that, you know, if you offer it in one way, in one chip, or I don't know, a DVD or a USB or something, it may be different. But I was thinking a video could bring that person even more to life who's written that ethical will for his or her descendants.
Right. So you're getting a little ahead of the game here, Ari, but let me speak to that. I was going to get to that after we spend time in this letter, but as a response since you raised it. So in terms of when you share it, there's no reason why your children need to wait for your demise to read your ethical will. So creating a setting or a stage, you know, be it a Jewish holiday or a Thanksgiving or sometime when the family's gathered, and you might consider sending it in advance and setting up a time where there could be a conversation. you might have, if depending how many children you have, you may want to have a chance to speak to each child individually because different children will react very differently. Our kids are not the same, as a lot of us have come to notice. But there's no reason, there's no rule about when you share, when you're not. There are people who might say, I prefer not to be present when my kids read it, let them read it for what it's worth. But following on Bob's comment, because things that you write could be misunderstood, having a chance to process it could be very, very rich and also very challenging, by the way, especially if things you put in your ethical will are specifically not consonant with the choices that your kids have already made as young adult or adult children, right? That's a possibility. With regard to video, at the very end, I'm going to share some resources, and I will share a link to a repository for ethical wills that can be done by video. And it's a Jewish site. I'll say more about it when we get to it. So you're ahead of the game, Ori.
Ralph?
Yeah, I may be missing something here, but I see this as more written for the author's sake, that she's reached a stage in her life and bless her, she has a sense of closure in her life. She's happy, she's satisfied, which is an important message in its own. But I don't see this as kind of more, I don't see this as what I expected as kind of a prospective, passing your experiences, passing words on to the next generation or passing some observation on to your children. I see this as a nice, she's reached a sense, she's proud of her family. She's glad that that she's done it in a Jewish way, but I don't see it's like, okay, so where's the wealth?
Yeah, so you're picking up on something that I said in response to Phil's comment earlier, Ralph, and that is that a prior generation had no problem with being instructive, directive, didactic even, right? That's the privilege of an older generation to the younger generation. I think this is probably more typical of where many of us might be today. Let my children know who I am and what matters to me, and the rest let them figure out, right? Far less instruction than we saw in the Maimonides letter. Interesting you picked up on that.
Myrna?
As I was reading this, I was struck by, let me back up a little bit. I have attended several classes on writing ethical wills. A number of years ago, Carol Hausman ran a 2 or 3-part class on ethical wills, and I have struggled with it. And what I found particularly, what could be particularly helpful for me and maybe for others, is to make a timeline of important events in my life. Because as I think about it, that reflects, those important events reflect something about me. And that may be a way for me to actually do an ethical will, which I have struggled with and have not been successful to date. So I just wanted to share that thought.
Thanks, Myrna.
Sue?
Yeah, I just want to share, when I was growing up, my father used to leave me tape cassette messages, which we didn't talk to each other. So that's how he would communicate with me, which was tape cassette messages. And he left me one that was to be heard after I died. And I had transcribed all of those messages, and I just recently came across one of them, came across all of them recently. And what he really was doing was writing a series of ethical wills, I guess in today's language, because there were instructions of what, who he was, what he thought, what his value systems were, and what he wanted to pass on to me. And my father died when I was a teenager, so that obviously I didn't necessarily hear all the words that he was saying and the wisdom of what he was conveying in the way that he meant it at that particular time. As I grow older and I reread what he had written, I can, and because it's on cassette, I haven't listened to it. I haven't listened to the cassettes for a while. I have his voice, but I also have his cadence, his words, the way he viewed the world, and the way he was hoping that I would view the world. So I guess just as a side note, I have yet to do it for my son, but I received a tremendous gift from my father.
Very nice. Thanks for sharing that, Sue. I'm curious that there's not been a lot of reaction to the content of this second contemporary ethical will. I'm kind of curious whether anyone had any strong reactions, things that they liked about it, things they didn't like about it.
Well, this dovetails also with what Myrna was saying. She mentions events in her life. And I think that, and Myrna's comment was, if you think about the events in your life, you'll be drawn to what your values are, which I was thinking myself was be a very important way of going about, well, what are my values? What do I care about? And what I was aware of was as the letter was being read, when she made mention of, being married, having children, okay, I've done that, that's fine, that's been great. But at the same time, when she made mention of the Women's March, I had a whole different reaction. I cared about it in a completely different way. It was an emotional, visceral reaction. And I remembered being there. I remembered how exciting it was, how much I felt like I was helping move the world in the right direction. And then it hit me that sometimes it's about, the kind of life events that we've all, many of us have been through, whether it's marriage and children and all that. And sometimes it's deeper than that. And I really think it's an interesting question to look at, well, how do you kind of parse out your values such that you feel like you have something that's worth communicating to your children or anyone else?
Right. Another question I would raise here, just kind of to put another thought out, and that is whether you write an ethical will that is child specific or one for all your kids. And the reason I say that is that, just thinking about my own children, I think each one needs a different letter. I don't see the same letter working for each of my 3 children, just the way I see my kids. And I actually have been writing pieces of an ethical will to them at various life milestones for each of them over the course of their lives. Graduation from high school and college, before marriage, things like that. And I'm very conscious about how I've customized what I'm saying, in a sense, which is different than simply giving a timeline of events in my life. That then you let them read into it, whatever you may want to do. But it's just a thought that I want to share. Nothing says you can only do one.
Ralph?
Yes, Sid, but if you write different versions to different kids, is it possible that afterwards they're going to start comparing notes and saying, wait a second, why did Dad write this to me, but he wrote that to you? And would that create a strange dynamic or not?
I may not be around to find out. I'm not sure. I think they're very personal letters. I would be surprised if my kids share those letters with each other.
Shauna?
I'm also thinking of the idea of sharing this in time to hear that you aren't living your values the way you think you are. I don't know if that ever has happened, but sometimes we have an idea of how we act, and sometimes we act differently towards family. Sometimes we're kinder to strangers than we are within our own household. So it'd be interesting to think about doing something like this in time to really learn something about yourself, not just pass something on.
One of the things that triggers in my mind, which I think is missing in this letter, which I like a lot, by the way, I'm very moved by it. But one thing that's missing is any sense of her own failures. right? I think that one thing that could be very powerful to put in an ethical will is to indicate where you made decisions that you might regret, or acknowledging how hard life can be. Sometimes our children put us on a pedestal and think that we have it all figured out. And for them, life seems so hard. And they say, well, I could never have life figured out the way my mom did or my dad did, whatever else. And that sometimes can lead to some really challenging navigation of one's own life. And sometimes including in an ethical will, where you're less than perfect, or where you've made some mistakes, and you acknowledge that, it could be itself a very powerful lesson.
Carol.
Reflecting on what Rabbi Sid just said, yeah, it is, I think it's vitally important for our children, for our offspring, to realize that we do make mistakes, and that we and we might have regrets, and everything hasn't gone the way we've always wanted. But one other thing that I wanted to comment on, in terms of Sid saying how he writes a different ethical will for each child, looking at the comment, what matters is not to waste the precious life you are given. So that could be a time to not only talk about the things that we have done, but to talk about the things that the child has done that we greatly value and greatly admire. And that's all.
Yeah, I think there's a powerful observation, and how often I've heard people talk about in their adulthood how they were never appreciated or recognized by a parent, and that they carry that in a very and deeply wounded by that. And so for some people, for some adults, it's hard to express that for some whatever reason, okay? But to commit to writing some acknowledgement from you to a child when you were proud of them, it can be very, very powerful, especially if it's read after your death.
Ethel.
Ethel, unmute. Ethel, you got to start it again.
Yep.
Sorry.
So as someone who does not have children, I don't want to be avoiding the idea of writing an ethical will for the benefit of the rest of my nieces and nephews, who are great nieces and nephews and great and abundant. But I'm not sure that I really have the kind of relationship with them that in the same way that a parent has with their children. I'm sure I have some things to say, but I'm not sure who I'm saying it to. Can you help with that?
Well, what occurs to me, I appreciate you sharing that, Ethel. One thing that occurs to me is, what if you wrote something that was akin to an ethical will, and you leave that with your directives for after you pass away, that is what you want to have read at your funeral. So as opposed to a rabbi or any officiant who's going to be officiating at your funeral, God forbid, may be a long way away, as opposed to then interviewing some of your closest friends and nieces and nephews, you put in your own words what you hope your life has meant, right? That can be very powerful. I mean, I've never experienced it, but I think it's a wonderful idea. Some of you may know that a couple of years ago, Susanna Isaacson put together a little ceremony that was at a Dutch Shalom, which was, she said, only half jokingly, was essentially her chance to be at her own funeral. Not to be maudlin about it, she simply said there were things that she wanted to say and things that she wanted to hear before she died. and she essentially orchestrated an event with people very significant to her in her life for what was a most moving and beautiful event. So it's in the same spirit as that.
Cheryl? You're muted, Cheryl.
I appreciate what the writer wrote here. I'm kind of interested in her perspectives on her life, but you can also cull this down. Her actual messages to the reader almost come across as blessings and, or commandments, like even this line, where is it? Basically love yourself, love your family, love your world, be disciplined. I mean, these are strong actions that she's trying to impart to whoever she's writing this for. And along the lines of what Sid said a couple of minutes ago, in terms of admitting maybe some of our own failures or weaknesses or mistakes in what we write about ourselves. Also, I can see it could be really generous and important to give our readers, children or whoever, also the permission to be imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
And say, that's okay, you learn, it's one way you learn, and give yourself a break, because this is a hard road and everybody does their best.
Right. Thank you, Cheryl. So I want to move on to, I think I need to stop sharing and then share again. I want to share a second document. Here we go. Getting a little bit more practical now. Okay, this is essentially, I put together a little bit of a template of, for a lot of people a few people have said on this call that they've tried to write ethical will several times without success. And of course, most writing coaches will say, start with an outline, and that might help you kind of move through it. So here's a potential outline for an ethical will, okay? An opening greeting, right? Speak to your past. What do you want to share from your life? What are your core values, important people and experiences in your life, lessons learned, some family history you want to pass down, okay? What is the present? Why are you making the will now? What's motivating you, okay? How you've tried your best to live the values that you mentioned. I think that's where you would come in to say, I think some level of modesty there is probably appropriate, right? I haven't always lived the values that I've spoken about. These are values that I care about. I'd like to think that I've oftentimes lived up to them, but I know I've oftentimes fallen short. I think that's probably is a helpful message to pass down, okay? A chance to say what matters most in life. This is, of course, your opinion, but even if right now you think that your kids don't really care all that much what matters most to you in your life, when you are gone, they will want to know more. This was one of the things of my sermon, that at numerous funerals, I found adult children feeling some remorse for not asking this question much more of their parents while they were still alive. Like suddenly, people will then spend a decade or more trying to find out what mattered a lot to my mom or my dad, or maybe an uncle or an aunt, whatever else, when they could have had that conversation earlier on in life. Now, those conversations aren't always easy to ask. Someone came up to me and confided to me after my sermon that they tried numerous times with their father to have this conversation, and every time the father pushed it away, minimized it, said it was silly, not relevant, we could talk about it another time. In other words, it was a real avoidance pattern. And I don't know the relationship well enough to analyze that. I'm just sharing what was shared with me, that sometimes you make the effort and you don't get anything back. Susan shared the fact that her father left her tapes, okay? Sometimes leaving a tape like that is easier than saying it face to face to a child. So it's a technique, and you'll see about this. I'm gonna put in a chat box this link which is a way you can actually do an ethical will as a video, okay? And then in terms of the future, this is essentially what do you wish for your reader or readers, your hopes, your blessings for them, whatever else. So you can play with this outline in any way you'd like, but it's something could be a starting point if you want to take a stab at this, okay? I'm going to make this, I'm going to put this in the chat box in a moment so you can copy it. Okay, this is actually from the website of the Manhattan JCC on the Upper West Side. There are two JCCs in Manhattan. 92nd Street Y is kind of the one that's been around much longer. That's on the East Side. And on the West Side, it's called the Manhattan JCC. They have a whole site about ethical wills, and they've created a very, very well done template and prompts about how you can create an ethical will online, which could essentially be sent as a digital link to your children, so they can actually see you and hear you as you do it. Okay, and then a couple of book citations and the like. So I'm gonna stop sharing and open up some questions, and then I'm gonna also put that link in the box.
Sid, I'm wondering if there's a way to get that whole sheet from you.
Yeah, so what I would say is the only way I know how to do that is if anyone sends me an email, I'll send you both documents that I shared. Okay?
Great, thanks.
And there's the link I just sent everyone for that website where you can actually have prompts and create a video ethical will for the next generation. So let's just open up to any kind of questions or comments that you want to make. Good, Bob.
You know, recently I've been thinking, in some ways, the older I get, the less I have to say. And or, you know, the less I think that I really have wisdom that will make a difference to my kids. And really, I've, you know, I have a few ideas for them, but I really want to leave them with a sense of my love for them. You know, in the past, I spent a lot of time trying to write autobiography and long tomes about the way I thought about things. And I, as I said, as the older I get, the less I think that those types of things are really my primary legacy. And my love for them, I think, is what I'm left with.
Very interesting. I don't want to judge that one way or the other, Bob. I mean, I'm tempted to say that you underestimate what you have to offer, but I think your observation itself is quite powerful. I mean, just sitting with that question for oneself is like pretty powerful. But also don't sell yourself short. Or let me say that one other way, if I may. I think the other thing I want to say is that even if in reflecting on that matter, that you actually have less to say today than you think you might have had a decade ago, try and put yourself in the shoes of your children and what they might want to hear, right? And so humility is a very great virtue. But imagine, you know, after we're gone, there's a need for children to kind of know more about their parents. And how do we satisfy that need in a healthy way? I think that's the other thing to say. That's the balancing act you got to do. So I really admire, you know, your observation, but I just want to give you a way to kind of think about it in a more complex way.
Carol Light has her hand up and the other Carol has her hand up.
After my mother died, oh my gosh, there were so many things that I wish I had known about her life, just everyday things. And following Rabbi Sid's Yom Kippur sermon, my daughter sent out an email to all the grandparents asking us if we wanted, as a Hanukkah gift, to get one of these books that people have created with prompts so that you can write down, you can answer different questions, and we would all share it with each other. And that was directly related to what you said on Yom Kippur, Rabbi Sid. So thank you very much for that. And most of the grandparents have gotten back, there are a whole bunch of us, and said that we would like to do it. And I've been writing memoirs, and I was sometimes asked the kids or grandkids what they want to know about. It's a way of processing my life for me, but it's also, a way for them to get to know me as a little girl, as a teenager, as a college student, as a young mother, as a divorcee, as a single parent, and all of these other aspects of my life and what it was like for me. And hopefully we will go through many of them before I die so that they can ask questions and get even a better sense of me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Carol. And we all wish you ongoing good health and speedy recovery, Carol, for all you've gone through.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to see you.
Hearing what Bob said and what Carol said, I was thinking along the same line. What if our kids were sitting here on their little Zoom, boxes, discussing their parents and what they'd like to hear from them in an ethical will, and then also the grandchildren, which is really, different things. And right now, I have a daughter who's 44. I kind of think she knows as much as I know. I mean, my mother didn't talk about her family or life at all, and she never was going to, so that wasn't going to happen. So we know what we know, and I, but what would they, and I don't think they'd really care all that much. And I think like what Bob said originally about the, I would take it a step further, like they really would be bored with it. Maybe he said that, I can't remember. But, and I know Sid, you said something to not feel like that, but I just think that's the reality of it. And I don't know about other people, but my daughter's so much smarter than me, and she's so much more worldly than me, and it's like, I don't know, I can't imagine. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Carol.
Ralph?
Yeah, talking about connecting to the grandchildren, hopefully we expect to live for a few more years. Now the grandchildren know them as kids, and we react to them as grandparents to kids or something like that. But if it goes on another 10 years, they're gonna have gone through a lot of changes. They're gonna be adults, or they're gonna be forming these personalities that we had no inkling of back then. So how do we know how to communicate with them at that kind of one-on-one level when we don't really know who they're going to be, or they're still a little bit underdeveloped?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the case of grandchildren who are, still grade school or even high school, whatever else, it may be premature to try and be too specific to them because they aren't fully formed yet. That's why I think, most ethical wills go to one generation down. You'd have to write something much more generic that might be a benefit to the next generation. But I wouldn't, at this point in time, my children are already adults, right? And so I might do something a bit more directed given who they are and the direction and choices that they've made. But if someone's got grandchildren who are, still in grade school, whatever else, I'm not sure that being too directive is wise.
Sid, I'm just going to jump in. Nobody's hand is raised, and I've had a couple thoughts. One is that how simple it could be to a grandchild. Like my mother was dying just before my daughter's bat mitzvah. And I asked her what she would want to write to my daughter. And it was very simple. And she was already sort of very compromised, but it was kind of like what you were saying, Bob. It was basically a testament to her love for this 13-year-old, not quite 13-year-old, and her wishes for her life. And it was, I'm sort of getting choked up remembering it. It was very meaningful. And the other thought I had is in thinking about what we'd want to put in this ethical will is, I'm sure many of us have the experience, I know I do, of wishing my parents were still here so I could ask them about, this or that when they went through the phase like that I'm going through, or what it was like for them when, they had teenagers, when their kids got married. I mean, things like that. And I think that might be something that might be helpful, at least to me, in shaping what I would want to put into something like this, anticipating the times in their lives that I won't necessarily be there for, to offer my perspective as if we were having a conversation.
Nice. Thanks, Marla. So I'm going to bring this to a close. Appreciate people's participation.
Oh, you have one more comment down there, Sid.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't know your name. It says Kevin Dwyer. Yeah. You need to unmute.
Please unmute. We can't hear you.
I think it's Gertie Trackman.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's me.
So someone else is speaking.
Yeah, my computer comes on as Kevin, so I can't help it. There must be a way to change it, but given my age, I don't know how to do that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, tell us your name, please.
Eileen Dwyer.
Eileen, hi.
Right. So at any rate, I've enjoyed this so much, and I think what I'm enjoying is getting little pieces from what everyone has contributed, and thinking how that's going to help me to write my will. I've already written one letter to one child, and I found that helpful to myself. I don't know that I'm not finished with it, because I think this has given me some more food for thought. I love what Bob had to say, and I wrote that down in terms of my love for you. I'm choking up too. I want to add something, though. One of the things I did about our grandchildren is I took them back to where I grew up. I don't know if you've ever thought about them, or I'm old enough for, it's been a long time. So we all went and visited Brooklyn, and the house I grew up, we went up to look at the apartment. The mezuzah was still on the door. So that's maybe another active way to demonstrate with the grandkids that, because they're maybe too young to write an ethical will or to actually go back. And I was selfish enough to bring them back to where I grew up, and I forgot about their Kevin Dwyer. And they said, well, when are we going to go visit Popsy's child where he grew up? And that was a very important weekend that we spent.
Thank you, Eileen. Thanks for sharing that.
Sid,
All right,
Gertie has had her hand up also.
Very last comment, Gertie. Go ahead.
What I did is I asked my son to film me. He had a film in front of me, and I was telling him about my life. And my life was pretty complicated. Basically, my parents escaped, and my grandparents escaped from Germany with the last boat by pure miracle. And and I was born in, excuse me, I was born in Bolivia and then raised in Argentina and traveled all over the world. And I told them that rather than writing it on a piece of paper, I wanted them to see my face while I was telling that. And, and how I ended up in this country, and all these miracles that happened in my life and in the life of my parents and grandparents, and what I studied. And then, of course, I told them what I hope, if I'm not here anymore, what I hope from them to
or what I expect and hope how they can live, and maybe someday they too can tell their children and grandchildren what their great grandparents were all about and how happened that they ended up in Bolivia and so on and so forth. And I felt that that was much more meaningful than having it written on a piece of paper that who knows might end up who knows where. That's just my contribution.
Right. Gertie, aren't you Alana's mom?
Yes, I'm Ilana's mother, right.
So for people who don't know, Gertie's daughter Alana is actually a very renowned documentary filmmaker. So my question is, why did you have your son film you and not Alana? Was she too expensive?
Good question.
Yeah, you should look. Alana's done some amazing movies. Anyway, thank you. And by the way, based on what Gertie said, that's where the link to that Manhattan JCC website would be helpful, because that does allow you to essentially film yourself giving that ethical will.
Actually, my son just joined your congregation.
And his name is?
Daniel Trachtman.
Okay, I look forward to meeting him. I know Alana quite well, actually, so look forward to meeting your son too.
You went together to school, I know.
Yeah. Anyway, so I put my email in the chat box. A lot of you know my email. Happy to send those two documents out. There's no way to do that if it's not on a website on this Zoom call. But thank you for participating, and best of luck if you want to take this task on. It's a gift to give to. It's a gift that keeps on giving to your next generation. All right. So,
Thank you, Sid.
wish everyone a Hanukkah Sameach, Chag U'Im Sameach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Chag Sameach, everyone.
Thanks, Sid, very much. I'm going to ask for the materials. I'll send you an email.
My pleasure. I thought that went pretty well.
Well, that's why I'm staying on. I thought it was wonderful, Sid.
All right.
Really wonderful. Yeah, you did a lovely job. It was really nice to have the juxtaposition of the two ethical wills, and there was lots of conversation. People were obviously really attuned to what you were saying and thinking about it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. What did you think about Bob Singer's comment about I have less and less to say as I get
I
older?
thought you handled it beautifully in the way you responded to him. I understood what he was saying, because in the end, it just comes down to love. And I was thinking about how he went through that scare too.
Oh yeah, it was near death. Very serious near death experience. Yeah.
How something like that, I think probably just makes you very attuned to what really matters most, how you really get to the essence of what's important. And I that's how I heard it, that's what he was saying.
Well, Bob is also a very humble spirit. And it doesn't shock me at all to hear him say that. Not that he doesn't have an immense amount to contribute, but that he just feels like, because I feel the same way. I feel like, well, what do I have to tell my kids that I haven't told them already? I mean, I'm on round 3 of the same stories, oh, yeah. So, but that's not to say there's not more there, but sometimes I feel like, well, okay, they know what I know, or they know they've gotten what I've imparted. And I think that's where Bob is coming from. I mean, he just doesn't see himself as, I have so much I want to impart to my kids, because he's already done that.
Well, also, how old are his kids?
His kids are in their 40s.
And they have children, and I think also the stage of life we're at, there's so many things we don't feel we can't say to our kids that we want to say to them, or we have thoughts that we need to keep to ourselves. So it feels like there's a lot of material right now. And I don't know over time whether it will feel that same way. I know I noticed that Carol Light put in the chat what her daughter had sent them, and it's called Storyworth. Have you heard of this?
I have heard someone else mention that to me at some point. I haven't looked it up though.
Well, Jessica for Mother's Day gave me that as a gift.
Oh, really? Is it a book or is it a website? What is
It's a website. This was like 2 or 3 years ago. This was before 2020, so it was 2019 or maybe 2018. And they send a prompt. Whoever gives you the gift
Right.
chooses the prompts, but it's every week, and some of them are quite meaty. And I wrote a few of them, and then I thought, I can't do this right now. It's too confrontive to think about. What do I want to say to my daughter about this question? You know, I need more time to chew on it. But what I thought was interesting was that she wanted to give me that. And that she
So let me
wanted,
ask you a question. So when you fill it out, does Jessica see that as soon as you write it?
I think so. But then the way this thing works is I think what she paid for was eventually it was supposed to go into a book. And I just never completed it. It was too daunting,
Yeah.
frankly, to do at that point in my life.
I can see also that certain things that I want, you know, the reason that people don't do it while they're still alive is because some stuff you're going to say raises up a lot of stuff that, you know, between you and child A, B, or C, right? Or depending on how many letters you got. And so it's kind of easier to kind of like do it afterwards. But I would think that kind of thing, if someone sees it right away and it's week after week, it's like too much.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
too
I
much.
think that was also part of what was happening was I was realizing she's not reading this now, you know,
Yeah.
and it's too hard to write it now, you know, but at some point it might be, or like what Carol Light was saying, you know, her daughter was the one who picked out, I think, the questions after hearing your sermon.
Yeah, but you know, Phil, to your point, you know, I have a thought I want to share, and that is, in this rabbinic fellowship thing I run, we have a custom that at the end of the year, each year, mentors write to their mentees a letter summarizing their conversations for the year. And time and again, what has been shared back to me is either from the mentor or from the rabbinic fellow that they only heard it when they read it. So a mentor will say, I've said to Johnny time and again that he should do blah, 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 blah. And he keeps like digging a hole for himself by like not following that, whatever else. But then when they write at the end of the year, it's like hits them like a ton of bricks. So it may seem that your stories and jokes are old, and some might say that, right? Not me. I'm just saying, some might say.
You're piling on now.
Some might say, but I don't sell yourself short. I think having it in some kind of more permanent form takes on a value and is able to be heard in ways that, you know, the fourth time you tell a joke won't be appreciated, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll share with you my latest thought for what to do as I move towards a retirement of sorts. And that is, I want to start a podcast, which is crazy because I don't have any idea how to do it, except Josh has done this and he's been interviewing his friends who are all interesting people doing fascinating things. And I thought, that's what I would want to do. I'd want to interview my friends. I'd want to talk to you.
So get ready.
And Sandy and Steve Shapiro and talk to Matt, you know, and just record it and ask probing questions in that spirit of, well, tell me about yourself. What was a meaningful time for you in elementary school and junior high and high school? I mean, things that your kids would want to know, but wouldn't really think to ask, or maybe wouldn't care enough to ask, but would be fascinated to hear. Those are the kinds of things I'd like to flesh out with people and have those conversations. You know, do it in an hour at a time. You know, don't do it for 10 hours, just 1 hour of a conversation, and then wrap it up, archive it, and have it be available for people who might want to share it with their family members.
Interesting idea.
Yeah, you'll be on the list.
Yeah, you already got a retirement project. Okay.
Yeah.
Get serious.
Sid,
All right.
I could change this topic for a moment unless there's something else either of you want to
I'm
say.
done. So where are we going to play on
But I
Saturday?
don't think you know this, so you might want to
Okay.
stick around to hear this. Do you want to finish where you're going to play?
Well, should we play it? You tell me, Sid. I'm paying, so we'll play wherever you want.
Let me find a court that's really expensive. Let's go to the Tilden's courts. They're nice.
Okay, Tilden on Saturday at 10.
Yeah, great.
Okay, got it.
So I'm realizing I haven't had a chance to tell Phil this yet either, and I'll go into more detail with him. But I don't know, you don't have to tell me where things are at with Josh and Kate. It does, you know, it may be private, but I did have yesterday, they met with the Father
Dan.
whatever his name, yeah, Father Dan. And apparently Father Dan is not willing to co-officiate. And he apparently gave Kate his blessings that if he wasn't there, how did he put it? How did Josh put it? That they can invoke the Catholic side in the ceremony through readings if they want, but not through a priest. But that the church would still recognize the marriage, which was what Kate was concerned about. So apparently they're trying to figure out what to do now, given this new development. But this literally, I just found this out today. So I kind of just wanted you to know, if you hadn't heard from Josh or Kate, that they're still sort of dealing with this kind of thing.
It's a little bit of a curveball. I mean, I'm surprised to hear. I didn't know what the practice was, because my last conversation, which probably is easily 6 weeks old, maybe more.
Yeah. I think they had to get this other piece in place before they proceeded, probably.
Well, the way we left it was that Kate was going to talk to Father Dan, because I said, I don't know what a priest's normal practice would be, so I can't tell you whether I would feel comfortable standing there with him or not. So they were going to contact Father Dan, with whom they had lost contact for some reason, like the communication had gotten broken and was not reconnecting easily. So they said, we're not sure why, let's try and get, and once they contacted him, they were going to put the two of us in touch. So this is a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah. Yeah, I was surprised also.
So is the implication that Father Dan is just unwilling to do a wedding with a rabbi, or is it something more than that, or less than that?
This is what Josh wrote. I asked the question, does this mean he'd be willing to co-officiate with a rabbi at the venue? But is not willing to do the ceremony you created, because they apparently created some kind of ceremony. Maybe they told you this, I don't know. And Josh wrote back, no, he won't co-officiate with a rabbi at the venue.
Which, by the way, corresponds to the practice of many rabbis who would not co-officiate with a minister or a priest.
Right, right.
Yeah,
right.
and so you know, Catholicism is Orthodox Christianity.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's unreformed Christianity. So it's not surprising they're the counterpart to the Orthodox.
Yeah, yeah.
Does that suggest that the priest would be willing to do it if it were in a church?
I don't know. I decided not to keep texting about it, because I decided it was better to have a conversation, but I just wanted that clarification of where that was. It made me curious about, maybe you know this, Sid, like when Jesus died and all that happened, was the first Christian religion Catholicism? I feel like I should know this, but.
Well, first of all, Christianity emerges not immediately upon Jesus's death. It's like takes 2 centuries later for Paul to like build the church around the life and teachings of Jesus.
So 200 years later?
Yeah, I mean, give or take. I mean, I've got to,
yeah.
I forget my chronology, but it wasn't right away. So Paul is the architect of the church.
Yeah. So there were people who like Jesus was a leader during his day. So there were people who kept his teachings going somehow, and then Paul.
Correct. And there is a history of people who called themselves Jewish Christians. So there were Jews who were followers of the teachings of Jesus, who was essentially like a rabbi, he was a teacher.
Yeah.
And it was Paul who created the practices and rituals that actually broke away from this kind of syncretic. You know the word syncretism? You know what that word means? Syncretism, syncretism. It's a word you learn in rabbinical school. It's when two religions get mixed together. It's not a flattering term.
Uh-huh.
Meaning, if you are a priest or a rabbi or a minister, and you say that's moving in the direction of syncretism, that's an insult.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Uh-huh.
and that's, by the way, why
Like too much intermarriage.
that's why priests won't co-officiate. That's why a lot of rabbis won't co-officiate, because, like, let's be clear, we're either doing Jewish stuff or Christian stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So choose your blessing, choose your poison.
Right. Right. Interesting. Did I tell you that I read this book by Sue Monk Kidd, the woman who wrote The Secret Life of Bees? You know that book? There was a movie about- She wrote a book called The Book of Longings, which is a fictional account of Jesus's wife. And part of what's very interesting about it is the way she weaves in Jesus being a Jew, like he's saying Kaddish for his father in a cave. And, you know, it was just a very, very interesting book. And he's upset with the rabbis who are, or the temple, whatever they were called then, people who were charging, so temple priests who were charging so much for sacrifices. And, you know, I mean, probably history that you know, but it was just a very interesting novel about maybe what that time was like.
Is she Jewish?
I don't think so.
No.
I mean, her other book, The Secret Life of Bees, is about a Black Madonna.
Oh, okay.
Did you ever see that movie?
No.
Oh, it's wonderful.
It's a movie?
Yeah.
Secret Life of Bees.
Yeah,
Secret Life of Bees.
we saw it
Yeah,
together,
I
yeah.
remember.
Secret Life of Bees. I'm sure that Sandy knows the book. It's a
All right.
classic. Yeah. Anyway, so I don't know where things are at, but I thought I would just at least tell you that piece.
All right. I'm on standby.
Yeah.
And I got a room at the Lakeview Inn.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear
You
that.
may have the way cleared for you, Sid. Father Dan may have just, he may have just retired in the middle of the second
Yeah.
set.
Today, as I was walking, I thought, does this
full
mean
muscle,
we're
he's
gonna
out.
does this mean we're gonna get to have a traditional Jewish wedding? I was getting my hopes up, but we'll see.
I mean, it's up to Josh and Kate. It
Yeah.
does make it simpler
No,
for my participation.
it does, you're saying.
Of course.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. I mean, because the way I left it with Kate and Josh was to say how we go forward depends on what Father Dan feels is necessary for a Catholic ceremony.
Mhm.
And I either feel comfortable standing next to him to witness it or
Mhm.
not. And I can't predict that until I know what it is.
So we can thank Father Dan, maybe making it easier. I mean, the fact that he said to Kate, the church will still recognize your marriage, Josh wrote to me, is a big relief to Kate.
So
Because I don't know how important it is to Kate to have a priest there. I know it's very important to her aunt, her mother's, I think, older sister, who has this relationship with Father Dan. So,
So they might do another ceremony, but
I
it
have
wouldn't be
no
the same
idea.
thing as the
I-
wedding.
I have no
Yeah,
idea.
okay.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I didn't even know that's a thing when he says to be recognized by the church. In other words, there's no corresponding thing like that in Judaism. Like
Oh.
we don't have a hierarchy that like the Mormon church like records people and they're in the archives. So you're officially a Mormon, born a Mormon, died a Mormon, whatever it's going to be. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Well, it's about the sacraments, as Kate explained it to me, that there's certain sacraments as a Catholic that you have to get to heaven.
Okay.
And this was, back in 2020, when we were having a lot of this tension about whether it would be in a church or not. She said to me that in order for her to have this sacrament of marriage, she had to be married in a church. So this is what Father Dan, I think, is saying to her, as at least I understood Josh's text. I mean, I haven't actually had a conversation with him, but he was saying that Father Dan was saying that her marriage would be recognized.
Even if it didn't happen in a church.
I think from what Josh wrote. Now, this is from Josh. It'll be good to talk to Kate and see what she says, but
yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
I'll let you go, Sid.
Life's interesting, yes.
Yes, and I would love
I'll do
that.
this.
I love the handout. Do you want me to send you an email or is this enough?
Yeah, do that because I've got another call now, believe it or not, and I'll forget. So if I have an email, I'll get to it tomorrow, okay?
Thanks,
All right,
Sid. Thanks
Sid.
again.
Bye, Mara. See you, Phil.
Bye.
See you Saturday.
Bye.
Yeah.